What makes a festival unforgettable? The music, the crowds, or the mischief waiting just around the corner? Satia had come to Bubastis to find out. At dawn, the city stirred with quiet purpose. Merchants raised awnings, servants swept the streets, and garlands swayed in the warm breeze as Bubastis prepared for the festival to come. Satia reached the great temple of Bastet and slowed her steps before its towering painted columns. She paused there, her eyes shining as the temple's beauty nearly brought her to tears. But what truly made Bubastis special were the cats. Wandering freely through every street and courtyard, they moved with such quiet confidence that the whole festival seemed to revolve around them. Egyptians adored cats and guarded them with heartfelt care, and Satia loved them too, in her own quiet, curious way, always watching their graceful steps. Satia relished the lively atmosphere of the city, though small dangers hid easily in the festival's noise. For example, Fartum and the pickpockets moved through the crowds with swift, practiced hands. There were also scammers working the crowded lanes with polished smiles. They ran the game of 3 cups, cheating outrageously whenever curious crowds leaned in. And with so much beer and wine flowing, fistfights broke out across the festival, especially in the dim alleys behind the temple where brawlers roamed late. Yet overall the festival stayed joyful, and Satia found herself enjoying the noise and color. She even tried the local honey-dipped figs, a sweet treat famous in Bubastis. As she ate her 3rd serving of figs, a pickpocket slipped up behind her in the busy crowd. He reached for her purse, trusting his quick hands to stay unseen. The moment the knot loosened, fate intervened. A striped cat pressed her paw on the purse, eyes bright with mischief, quietly insisting, "Mine, mine, absolutely mine." Satia noticed nothing at all and simply decided that honeyed figs were now her favorite treat. She liked and subscribed to the stall in her own delighted way. As Satia walked down the main alley toward the busy marketplace, she paused beside a stall run by one of the street scammers. The crowd gathered close, eager to see his trick. Satia placed a single gold coin on the scammer's table, calm and perfectly certain of herself. The man boasted that anyone could win his game, if only they watched carefully. But just as the man prepared to cheat, a bold cat dug its claws into the fabric of his vest. He froze in surprise, unable to pull off his usual trick. Satia won her bet and received a 2nd gold coin, with amused applause from the crowd. She smiled mischievously and slipped away before the scammer could recover. She knew there was a quiet park with a lovely view hidden behind the temple grounds. To reach it, she had to pass through the narrow back alleys, leading away from the crowds. Satia stepped into the narrow alley, letting the festival noise fade behind her. After the first bend, she saw a brute towering over a beggar, his posture alone enough to show trouble. In the alley's darkness, 3 shadowy cats swept toward the bandit with silent, uncanny speed. He stumbled back in terror at the sight and fled at once, desperate to escape their eerie glow. Satia knelt beside the beggar and placed her 2 gold coins gently into his shaking hands. He bowed his head and whispered, "Thank you, my lady. Blessings follow your steps." Satia left the alley and climbed the quiet steps to the temple terrace. The evening light softened the stone bench, the papyrus, and the wide view of Bubastis below. She sat to breathe, letting the fading warmth settle in her chest. Then, the cats appeared, one by one, slipping from the foliage like silent shadows answering a call. They gathered around Satia's bench, forming a soft circle of tails and whiskers. She greeted each one with a gentle nod, as though she had known them all her life. "Tamio," she began gently, "you must stop stealing entire baskets of fresh fish. Take just one and slip away before anyone notices. The other cats watched him with solemn interest, as if this were a very important rule of proper feline behavior. "Moo moo," she said with a fond sigh. "When you knock over a pot, don't stare at humans like you're innocent. They know you are guilty. Just meow sweetly, and they'll forgive anything." Around her, the cats sat upright and attentive, absorbing each lesson as if she were the wisest teacher they had ever known. "And finally, Meowhotep," she continued. "You greet every pretty kitty in Bubastis, and rightly so. But don't forget to hunt the mice in old Mentu's granary before they eat all his grain." The gathered cats nodded, or at least wiggled their whiskers, like students agreeing this was perfectly reasonable advice. "I'll head back to the festival now," Satya told her gathered clouder with a smile. "Go wait by the temple doors tonight. That's where the finest offerings always arrive." As the cat scampered off toward the temple doors, Satya slipped back into the festival alley. She danced and purred through half the night, losing herself in laughter and bright music. At the first pale light of dawn, Satya felt a small twitch flicker behind her ear. It was the quiet sign she had been waiting for, the gentle call telling her it was time to slip away. She gave the waking festival one last playful wave before letting her disguise fall. Then Satya dissolved into a drifting swirl of gold dust, vanishing as lightly as a breath of dawn. Back in the realm of the gods, she stepped beside Osiris as though returning from a simple stroll. He gave her a knowing smile and asked, "So, Basti, how was your little trip to Earth?" She laughed and said, "Oh dear, the visit was absolutely delightful. I shall return next year in my feline form to stir a little elegant chaos." Have you ever wondered what becomes of a name when no one remembers how to speak it? In the temple gardens of Abydos, a humble gardener named Hori quietly asked himself that question as he trimmed flowers for the shrine of Isis. Every morning, Hori walked the paths in his leather vest and linen kilt, shoulder-length black hair tied back, whispering greetings to each plant as if they were old friends. He knew the moods of the lotus and the temper of the sycamores, which roots liked shade and which towels soaked up too much heat from the sun. Yet for all his care and calloused hands, his name was rarely spoken inside the great halls where priests chanted and incense curled toward the painted ceilings. One day, while walking past a chipped memorial stele near the garden wall, he noticed something that made him stop. The stele's carved lines were still clear, but in the place where a person's name should have been, there was only a smear of broken stone and faded paint, as if the name itself had been stolen. Hori suddenly remembered how, weeks before, he had bumped the old stele with a heavy pot and seen a flake of stone fall. But if a name was lost, the cow might wander without finding its offerings. Guilt flowed through him like dark water. "What if a soul is waiting?" he whispered, "and the path is closed because I helped erase the only door?" Determined to set things right, Hori went into the temple's outer halls, where the walls were covered with painted gods and orderly rows of hieroglyphs. Inside, a senior scribe with neatly braided hair and a stiff linen robe looked up from his papyrus and frowned. "You are from the gardens," a man said. "So what business do you have with lost names?" Hori explained about the broken stele. He asked if there were records, old rolls of papyrus, that might reveal whose name had once been inscribed on the damaged stone. The scribe sighed and said, "The scrolls are far too many. It's like Wikipedia in here, and you can't even read." Then he added, "And I've no time to chase a gardener's errands." Rejected but not defeated, Hori returned to the garden and sought wisdom in the only library that welcomed him without question, the trees. As he was tending a row of young fig saplings, old Samun, the retired gardener who now walked with a crooked cane, shuffled into the sunlight, as he often did, to visit the place he once cared for. Hori explained the trouble with the broken stele. The old man chuckled and said, "Oh, I remember when they set that stele up. I was a young lad then." But the name? No, that slipped away like sand in a sieve. Might have been a priest, or a singer of hymns, or someone else entirely. Nights passed, and Hori's sleep became shallow as a half-dried pool filled with restless reflections. He dreamed of blank cartouches floating like boats on the Nile, each one waiting for a name that would not come. One dream returned again and again. A woman standing at the edge of the garden, her hair braided and her eyes patient, yet her lips never quite forming a word. Hori begged her to tell him her name, but her lips trembled without sound, as if the truth itself had been taken from her. He woke with the tightness in his chest and went straight to the garden stele, the only place that felt close to her wordless sorrow. There he knelt, whispering a simple prayer that the gods would guide him toward the name she could not speak. In his worry, Hori imagined the scales of Ma'at tipping all the way down, his heart so heavy it dragged the beam to the floor. In that fearful vision, even Anubis stood beside the scale, scratching his head, unsure what to do with such a burden. His mind then conjured Ammit staring at him with a hungry gleam, licking her crocodile lips as if waiting for judgment. The fear clung to him as tightly as a shadow at dusk. Then he heard a soft ripple behind him near the garden pond. The sound was small but sure, like someone stepping gently through water. He turned slowly, breath caught halfway in his chest. A figure rose from the pond in a column of pale blue light, the water folding away from her like opening petals. Isis stepped onto the stones without disturbing a single ripple, her presence both serene and overwhelming. The moonlight seemed to brighten just to follow her movements. She stood before him and said that the soul of the silent woman was indeed still waiting, caught between worlds longer than she ever should have been. It was not entirely Hori's fault, she explained, because the netherworld had been drowning in a 50-year backlog from plague, famine, and Pharaoh's endless wars. With that many new cases, she added dryly, even divine administration feels like running a business with too many orders and not enough scribes. Then she knelt by the pond and swept her hand across its surface, and glowing drawings rose like living ink. The woman's life, her joys, her mistakes, her quiet rebellions. Scenes shimmered on the water in soft gold lines until the ripples carried them away again. And before vanishing, Isis said gently, "If I were you, I'd have a look at the trees behind the third chapel of Ma'at. That's where she used to play hooky when she was a novice." At the first light of dawn, Hori slipped quietly into the grove behind the third chapel of Ma'at, walking where Isis had told him the woman once used to hide. The gardens were still wrapped in pale gold mist, and every step felt like moving deeper into a memory waiting to be uncovered. There, on the rough bark of a sycamore fig, he found a name carved so faintly that daylight almost erased it. Hori traced the shallow grooves with trembling fingers. Hori stared at the faint carvings and whispered to himself, "That's a gardening tool. We call it a merit?" And as the word finally settled on his tongue, he breathed, "Her name was Merit. Her name was Merit." Hori turned and ran back toward the temple, his heart pounding with sudden certainty. For the first time since the stele broke, he knew exactly what he had to do. That same day, with the help of an apprentice carver, Hori repaired the damaged stele. Together, they restored the missing lines until the stone once again carried the name it had nearly lost. And somewhere far beyond the living world, the long-closed doors finally opened for Meret the hymn singer. Moral: a name remembered is a soul set free. Guard every story, for they guard thee. Kia was the youngest archivist in the great library of Thebes, a place that smelled of dry papyrus and dust. She preferred the company of scrolls to people, as scrolls rarely asked her to smile or make conversation. Her specialty was the books of breathing, essential manuals buried with the dead to help them navigate the afterlife without getting eaten by a demon. She organized them by dynasty, then by spell potency, and finally by how expensive the ink was. She spent her days in the dim corridors, her hands constantly stained with soot and reed dust. It was a quiet life, interrupted only by the occasional temple cat knocking over a stack of tax records. Most people found the silence of the library unsettling, claiming the shadows moved on their own. Kia simply ignored them, believing that if the shadows wanted to read, they should just get a library card. The trouble began when High Priest Mentu stormed in, his face a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his white linen robes. He announced that the scroll of the 7 gates, intended for the royal vizier's funeral at dawn, had vanished from its locked cedar chest. Without this scroll, the vizier's soul would be unable to pass the gates of the underworld and would likely spend eternity complaining. This was a terrifying prospect for everyone involved, as the vizier had been a notoriously grumpy man in life. Mentu paced the room, his sandals slapping against the stone floor like the ticking of a doom clock. He declared that the theft was an insult to the gods and a personal inconvenience to his schedule. He gave Kia until sunset to find it, or he would see to it that her next job involved cleaning the crocodile pins. She watched him leave, wondering if crocodiles were at least better listeners than high priests. Kia began her investigation at the cedar chest, examining the scene with the focus of a hawk spotting a field mouse. She observed how the wax seal had been snapped, not by brute force, but with terrifying precision. The bronze latch hung open in the dim light, looking less like a broken lock and more like a mouth left agape in surprise. Leaning closer, she spotted a peculiar smudge smeared across the metal, glowing with a vibrant, unearthly blue hue against the dark wood. It was a streak of pure indigo powder, the kind usually reserved for painting the ceilings of royal tombs to mimic the eternal night sky. The substance was not mere ink, but crushed lapis lazuli mixed with gold dust, glittering faintly under her lamp, as if it possessed its own internal light source. Such a messy application was baffling, looking as if a galaxy had been carelessly wiped against the furniture by a clumsy hand. Kia brushed her fingertip against the residue, expecting the grit of stone, but gasped as a shock of unnatural cold shot through her hand. It felt as though she had just touched the frozen heart of a winter night, a chill that certainly did not belong in the stifling heat of Thebes. She stepped into the sun-drenched colonnade to question Kinsu, a guard who treated his spear less like a weapon and more like a convenient leaning post for naps. He stood, blinking in the harsh light, swearing by every war god that his eyes had been wide open, despite the pillow marks clearly visible on his cheek. Under pressure, he admitted to hearing a rhythmic chiming echoing through the stone corridor, distinct and mournful, like the rattle of a funereal sistrum. He described the sound as heavy and metallic, the kind of noise that usually accompanies a weeping procession rather than a silent heist. Kensu shivered as he recalled a sudden draft that had swept past him, a freezing wind that smelled of myrrh and turned his sweat to ice. It was a chilling physical memory that seemed impossible to fabricate, especially for a man whose imagination was usually limited to his next meal. Hea glanced back at the heavy library doors, troubled by the image of a ceremonial shaker chiming inside a sealed rune. A common thief might pick a lock, but only a visitor from the grave would bring their own funeral music to a robbery. Hea moved to the rear alcove where a narrow window had been pried open, its heavy wooden shutters hanging askew on strained hinges. The rough limestone sill was marred with scratches, framing a blinding rectangle of white desert light that sliced through the library's gloom. Beyond the opening lay the jagged, sun-bleached cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, standing silent and imposing against the pale blue sky. It was a landscape of heat and ancient death, a forbidden place that no living thief would dare to run toward. Caught on a jagged splinter of the frame was a strip of gossamer linen, woven with a single thread of silver that glittered like a trapped star. The fabric was impossibly fine and cool to the touch, the distinct wrapping used only for the statues of gods within the inner sanctums. Before she could secure it, a sudden draft lifted the cloth from the wood, carrying it out into the open air, where it fluttered toward the western horizon. Hea watched it dance on the wind like a drifting spirit, pulling her gaze inevitably toward the silent tombs of the necropolis. Hea stood in the center of the library as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the room in blood-red light. She had the clues: indigo paint, a mourner's chime, and divine linen, but they pointed to a culprit that didn't make sense. Panic began to tighten her chest, for she knew the high priest would return any moment to demand the scroll. The thought of the crocodile pens was becoming less of a threat and more of a terrifying inevitability. Suddenly, the shadows in the corner of the room elongated and detached themselves from the wall, pooling together into a tall, elegant female form. Nephthys stepped out of the darkness, her skin the color of twilight, wearing a dress of indigo that matched the smudge on the lock perfectly. She had a bored expression, her wings folded behind her back like a cape made of midnight air. The goddess tapped the scroll against her chin, looking around the dusty library with an air of supreme indifference mixed with mild curiosity. I borrowed this to check a spelling error in the fourth gate spell. It was frankly embarrassing to read. She sighed deeply, the sound echoing like wind through a tomb, and fixed her glowing eyes on the trembling archivist. You mortals always forget to like and subscribe to the proper pronunciation guides, and it makes a journey terribly awkward for the soul. She floated slightly above the floor, the silver threads in her linen wrappings pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. It was clear that to her, the great library was nothing more than a convenient bookshelf to be raided at will. I have returned it now, but do tell your scribes that eternal is spelled with a different determinative in the netherworld. She extended her hand, and the scroll floated gently through the air, landing softly in Hea's open palms. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of myrrh and ancient rain, marking the presence of the divine. Nephthys vanished back into the shadows before Hea could even stammer a thank you, leaving only silence behind. Hea caught the scroll with trembling hands, bowing so low her nose nearly brushed the dusty floor. She quickly inspected the document, noting that the goddess had indeed corrected the grammar in the margins, using a shimmering ink. The vizier was a stickler for details, and he would likely appreciate the divine editing. High Priest Mentu swept back into the room, his torch casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to chase him across the floor. He looked, expecting to find an empty chest, his mouth already open to deliver a lecture on incompetence. Without a word, Hea extended her hand and offered him the scroll, the parchment gleaming softly in the dim torchlight. Mentu snatched it with a grunt of surprise, checking the seal quickly before hurrying out into the night to begin the rites. The next morning, the library was quiet again, just the way Kia liked it. She sat at her desk organizing the scrolls, but she left a small bowl of fresh water and indigo powder in the shadowy corner. She felt a cool breeze brush past her ear, a silent acknowledgement from the dark, and smiled to herself. It was good to know she had a powerful friend in high and low places. Nile sat in the dark, sobbing, convinced the gods had abandoned her. And yet, it had all begun that very morning. How had everything gone so terribly wrong? At dawn, the temple of Hathor at Dendera glowed softly as painted reliefs of dancers and cow-eared Hathor watched over the quiet courtyards. In a side hall, Nile practiced her steps. Her white linen tunic flowed with each turn, bronze anklets chiming softly as her bare feet traced graceful arcs across the cool stone. Beside her rested the sacred Sistrum, its dark wooden handle worn smooth and its electrum frame etched with tiny Hathor faces. The priest whispered that Hathor herself had enchanted it one festival night after far too much wine and adoration. Tipsy and delighted, the goddess had blessed the Sistrum so that when held by an innocent hand, they would force people to speak the truth, but only 3 times a day, and sometimes with surprising results. Suddenly Nile was interrupted. The High Keeper waddled into the courtyard like a man pursued by every god of chaos, his wrong belly leading the way and his face pink with panic. Though usually benevolent and gently absent-minded, this morning he looked as if his soul had been shaken loose. He caught his breath and blurted that the milk moon circlet was missing. A delicate crescent of polished silver inlaid with mother of pearl, worn by sacred dancers during festival rites, and whose glow was said to mimic Hathor's own lunar radiance. The High Keeper explained that he had already gathered the only 3 people who had access to the treasury during the night. Each of them denied everything, which, in his view, was exactly the kind of suspicious behavior guilty people exhibited. He wrung his hands and declared that only Nile could help now, because only her hand was innocent enough to wield the truth Sistrum. And before she could protest, he was already urging her toward the Hall of Offerings. The room was dim and solemn, its tall columns painted with fading scenes of Hathor receiving music and food, while incense coils drifted lazily like half-forgotten prayers. Offerings of bread, flowers, and cool water lined the low tables, their shadows stretching long across the polished floor. The first suspect, the temple scribe, whose name was Hori, stood trembling near a statue niche, so skinny he looked like he had been carved from leftover papyrus reeds. His knobbly elbows jutted out awkwardly, and his ink-stained fingers kept twitching, as though searching for a stylus that wasn't there. He straightened his bony back and announced that he had spent the entire night in the records chamber, copying tax inventories by lamplight. He swore that at least 3 temple cats could vouch for him, though they had all fallen asleep on the scrolls. He declared that he would never steal anything from the temple, because the gods saw everything, and ink stains were already punishment enough. Nile lifted the Sistrum, its electrum frame catching a stray beam of light, and gave it a clear, ringing shake. The bronze rings chimed through the hole, and a subtle shiver ran along the stone like a whispered spell. Hori's eyes flew wide as he blurted that he had, in fact, spent half the night teaching 3 white cats to walk in a solemn, sacred procession. complete with rhythmic hand claps. The High Keeper groaned into both hands, as if pleading with the gods to spare him from ever hearing such confessions again. The second suspect was Nebi, a merchant of incense whose round shape rivaled some of the offering jars beside him. He puffed out his chest and loudly protested that suspecting him was pure defamation, adding that he would summon his lawyer immediately, a phrase that made several priests blink in historical confusion. He explained that he had spent the night in his incense storeroom, counting jars and testing blends until his beard smelled like a small aromatic explosion. He insisted several apprentices had seen him leave only at dawn, though all of them were half asleep at the time. Nile lifted the sistrum again and gave it a crisp, decisive shake. Nebi stiffened, then exploded. Fine. Last night I was testing new poisons in my perfumes to make them more persuasive. Just a little toxicity for stronger customer loyalty, so they all like and subscribe. But I didn't steal the circlet. The High Keeper groaned and muttered a desperate prayer, begging the gods to preserve mankind from dodgy merchants. The third suspect was a bald junior priest named Menhu, rigid as a granite idol. He protested that his devotion knew no bounds, explaining that he was preparing to start a pilgrimage blog carved on clay tablets to inspire future generations. His intense stare suggested he fully expected the gods themselves to like and subscribe. Standing painfully straight, he declared that he had spent the entire night tending the sanctuary lamps. He claimed he had prayed so intensely that even the flame in the brazier had flickered in admiration. Hathor and Bastet be his witness. Nile raised the sistrum once more and rattled it sharply. A soft pulse of magic shimmered across the hall, and whose mouth snapped open and he blurted, "I slept all night. I still sleep with a protective hippo plushie because Taret scared me in a dream when I was 9. The High Keeper groaned loudly and muttered that his entire staff was utterly, hopelessly useless. Nile was sent away and wandered into a quiet side hall where columns muffled every sound, the air cool against her tear-warm cheeks. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees, feeling small beneath the painted ceiling, wondering why the gods delighted in giving magical objects that barely worked. The more she replayed the morning, the more she felt the universe was being particularly unfair to dancers. Without warning, the air shimmered like heated desert glass, and an ethereal figure blinked into existence. Heka, god of magic, though looking nothing like the crisp, polished deity carved on temple walls. His hair was tousled, his kilt askew, and he wore the unmistakable expression of someone abruptly pulled from sleep and shoved into divine errands. He glanced left and right as if checking whether anyone had seen him arrive in such a state. Yeah, you're the dancer, right?" he said, sounding like a man late to a meeting he didn't remember scheduling. "Okay, girl, I got a message for you, from Hathor. Gotta fix the Sistrum thingy. Make it work backwards. Normally I never do that, but Hathor asked, and you know nobody can refuse her anything." His mouth twitched into an involuntary, dreamy smile the moment he said the goddess's name. He waved his hands up and down in quick magical gestures that looked suspiciously improvised, sparks flickering like impatient fireflies. "Right, so the Sistrum should work in reverse now. It'll make people tell a blatant lie, a big fat whopper, once a day. So use wisely, girl." His voice stretched into a fading echo as he hurried away, calling, "Gotta scoot, Hathor's calling me." "Yes, honey, I'm on my way." Nile ran back through the painted halls, clutching the sistrum, her breath echoing against stone as she burst into the Hall of Offerings. The High Keeper was there, surrounded by a dozen worried priests and attendants, all arguing loudly about security and divine punishments. Without hesitating, Nile flipped the sistrum upside down and gave it a sharp rattle, its bronze rings chiming with unnatural force. The High Keeper let out a sudden, panicked shout. I absolutely did not hide the milk moon circlet behind the third column in the secret storage chamber. As everyone stared in stunned silence, the High Keeper suddenly brightened, clapping his hands together as he remembered exactly where he had hidden the circlet for safekeeping. His delight contrasted sharply with the horrified disbelief on every face around him. He waddled off to fetch it from the secret chamber behind the third column, humming proudly as though he had solved a great mystery. Everyone else exchanged long, weary looks, silently agreeing that it was probably time for the old man to consider retiring. At dusk, the temple settled into a soft golden quiet. The milk moon circlet safely returned to its shrine, where it glimmered like a captured moon. The painted columns drank in the fading light as the evening breeze carried the scent of incense and cooling stone. Nile moved with quiet grace in the courtyard, her anklets chiming softly as the dusk deepened around her. She let the rhythm carry her thoughts, pondering how the gods wove their truths through mortal lives, like drifting threads of moonlight. Moral: to the gods, a lie is truth in a clever disguise. Nothing stays hidden beneath their watching skies. Can something ever be absolutely perfect, or even too perfect? That thought drifted through Kemenyu's mind as he prepared to begin the most demanding commission of his life. Kemenyu was an architect of Memphis, charged with designing the new shrine of Ptah within the great temple complex. He had always loved order and symmetry. His ivory compass was his favorite tool, so precise, so steady. Kemenyu loved its balance and exactness. In his world, everything ought to be perfectly aligned. He wanted his shrine to be more than sound geometry. He wanted it to be a work of art, a creation worthy of the magnificent temple his predecessors had raised. That night, Kemenyu slept lightly, and in his dreams he walked through the shrine he had not yet built. But then something shifted in the dream, sudden and wrong. In an instant, the flawless shrine of his dreams fractured. A heartbeat later, it was nothing but a broken heap of stones, dust rising where perfection had stood. The dream twisted darker, and suddenly he stood in the great hall. The high priest's voice thundered that the collapse was Kemenyu's fault, and that he had offended the gods on purpose. Kemenyu jolted awake, trembling, his skin damp with cold sweat. Beside him, his wife slept on, turned away, while the painted statuette of Ptah on the bedroom shelf seemed to stare down at him. Long before dawn, Kemenyu crept into his workroom and unrolled the papyrus containing his blueprint. By lamplight, the lines looked flawless. Yet he felt it in his chest. Something was wrong. Something he couldn't see. He leaned closer, tracing shapes with a fingertip, but the papyrus betrayed nothing. He closed his eyes and imagined the shrine completed, perfect and radiant. And still a whisper of dread told him the beauty was false, that a hidden fault lay beneath the symmetry. Footsteps entered the doorway, and his wife blinked sleepily at him. "Do you want pancakes with sycamore syrup for breakfast?" she asked, blissfully ignorant of the architect's doubts. Maybe the problem wasn't in his lines at all, Kemenyu thought. Maybe something was wrong with the stone itself. He grabbed his sandals and headed toward the storage yard. Rows of limestone blocks waited in the cool morning air. He ran his hands across their surfaces, searching for cracks, soft patches, anything that might cause failure. The foreman joined him as Kemenyu voiced his concerns. But the man shook his head firmly and said the stone was excellent, some of the finest he had ever carved. In fact, the foreman added proudly, it was cut from the very same quarry as the famous obelisk everyone said would stand firm for all eternity. Kamenyu nodded, trying to look reassured. If the calculations were sound and the stone was excellent, then perhaps the timing itself was wrong, Kamenyu reasoned. So he went to the temple's astrology chamber. The priest studied his painted charts and nodded with grave assurance. Not only was the timing good, he said, it was excellent, and they should begin as soon as possible. He launched into an obscure explanation about rising decans and a benevolent tilt in the shadow of Sobek. Besides, he added casually, I'm hosting a seminar next week. Don't forget to subscribe. But when Kamenyu stepped out into the temple courtyard, a sudden vision seized him again. The shrine lay in ruins before his mind's eye. It felt real. He returned to his chamber once more, unrolled the blueprint, and searched every line until his eyes throbbed. Still he found nothing wrong, and despair crept into him. He wandered through the temple grounds in silence, hoping movement would clear his mind. But even the vast evening view and the beautiful sunset on Memphis could not lift the weight in his chest. As Kamenyu walked through the courtyard, he noticed a strange blue shimmer rising from the stones. It flickered like starlight trapped in dust. Then it gathered into the shape of the man. No, not a man. The god Ptah himself. Kamenyu watched, mesmerized, as Ptah traced glowing circles across the temple floor. Everything is not meant to be perfect, the god said, the blue lights rolling around his hands. A small flaw sometimes will prevent collapse. If built the traditional way, the shrine would not catch the dawn light at all, Ptah said, blue lines shifting around him. But with the ceiling made just a little asymmetrical, the light will shine through. Lovely it shall be, and illuminate the altar. Admired it will be, restored when needed, preserved for ages. Ptah said, the blue glow swirling brighter. Allowed to collapse, it will not be. Stand forever it shall, or at least until we the gods return to walk the earth again. And now, go add a little flaw to your ceiling to let the light in, my young apprentice. At these words, Kamenyu rushed back to the workshop, hard hammering. He redrew the blueprint around the sacred flaw, just like Ptah had shown. The lines snapped into place with gentle precision. Even the papyrus seemed relieved. It seemed to breathe and imagine the shrine. Stone blocks rose under the morning sun, each placed with quiet pride. Many workers admired the strange linen flaw that made everything work. On the final day, the shrine caught the first beam of dawn. Light poured into the sanctum like a whispered blessing, exactly as Ptah had predicted. Kamenyu traveled across Egypt afterward, teaching the secret he called the divine skylight. Builders listened, temples learned, and his small imperfection became a celebrated art. Kamenyu placed his ivory compass in Ptah's shrine. Some say it still lies there today, whispering, perfection needs flaw, or it cannot endure. A crack in the pattern makes the light more pure. The desert had closed around her like a trap. In the heart of the sandstorm, she knew only the gods could help her now. Strange to think that just a week ago, everything had begun so well. Memphis was buzzing that morning, alive with heat, noise, and the usual rumors that somehow traveled faster than any messenger. Isadren moved through it all with practiced ease, already half a dozen thoughts ahead. Everyone knew her as the courier scribe who never lost a scroll and never lost her temper, which made her a rare miracle in the city. On her belt swung a battered bronze sand compass, a device so unreliable that she kept it mostly out of sentiment and partly out of masochism. Still, she claimed it worked, if you squint hard enough and pray to 3 different gods. She had found it years ago while digging through an old campfire site, a family relic dropped by her uncle during one of his legendary attempts at desert romance. According to him, the goddess of the west wind had stolen his poem. According to Isadren, the poem probably ran away on its own. Isadren had barely set foot in Ptah's courtyard when priest Nephthys swooped toward her, robes flaring behind him like a man who practiced dramatic entrances in his spare time. His eyebrows alone could have delivered the message, but he insisted on using words anyway. He spoke of an ancient convoy ambushed in the desert, a sacred relic lost, a stone fallen from the sky, and a shrine swallowed by dunes long before anyone currently alive had learned to walk. Isadren listened politely, mostly because ignoring Nephthys was considered a public safety hazard. According to the priest, a traveler at last night's Hathor festival had enjoyed more beer than medically recommended and, in a moment of spectacular honesty, revealed markings in the desert that matched old temple records. Hathor loosens lips, Nephthys muttered. Then came the offer. Find the celestial relic, return it, and earn a generous payment that jingled temptingly in the purse he placed before her. Isadren hesitated only long enough to pretend she was thinking it over. Her first stop was Menes, a desert guide who knew the dunes so well he claimed they greeted him by name. He agreed to join her, but insisted they needed more muscle, ideally the kind that could scare bandits, or possibly even sandstorms, into changing direction. Isadren knew exactly who fit that description. Panesi, the retired Mariano archer, answered the door holding a bow taller than most bureaucrats' sense of self-importance. He looked Isadren up and down, nodded once, and said, "Finally, someone remembered I exist." By sunset, the trio was assembled. One quick-witted courier, one desert whisperer, and one human siege weapon. It wasn't a perfect team, but it was the kind of team that made adventure lean forward. They left Memphis on horseback, following a trail so sun-bleached it felt less like a road and more like a suggestion. By the second day, even the horses looked as though they regretted not choosing a quieter profession. When they finally reached the oasis, the shade felt like a blessing straight from the gods, or at least from a minor deity with excellent customer service instincts. Panesi dunked his entire head in the water, while Menes whispered thanks to every palm tree in sight. An elderly woman sat nearby, her silver hair framing her face in a way that suggested she feared neither time nor desert. She gave them directions in a tone that implied refusal was impossible, and her Sekhmet amulet glinted just long enough to make Isadren wonder who exactly was helping whom. None of them noticed the bandits crouched behind the palms, leaning in with the enthusiasm of professional eavesdroppers. By the time Isadren mounted her horse again, the bandits were already tossing coins to decide which one would claim credit for following her. The shrine appeared at dusk, half swallowed by dunes and looking exactly like the sort of place sensible people avoided. Naturally, this meant Isadren and her companions walked straight in. Inside, they found nothing but sand, silence, and the unmistakable scent of ancient disappointment. Menes muttered that the place had been dead for centuries, which was ironic considering how loudly it complained in the wind. Panesi stepped outside for a better view of the horizon, which was heroic code for "something feels wrong," and spotted the bandits perched boldly on a dune like vultures auditioning for a promotion. By the time he called out to the others, the sun was slipping low, the dunes were shifting ominously, and the entire world had the nerve to look as though it were preparing for a dramatic plot twist. The bandits descended the dune with the slow confidence of men who believed the universe had finally sent them a gift. Isedren wasn't sure whether to be afraid or offended by how casually they approached. Isedren knelt beside a cracked stone block, trying to convince any listening deity that now would be an excellent time for divine intervention. She didn't expect an answer, of course. The gods were notoriously allergic to schedules. Then the wind changed, gathering strength as if inhaling the entire desert in one breath, and a deep rumble rolled across the dunes. It wasn't a reply exactly, but it certainly felt like someone powerful had just checked their messages. The sandstorm erupted with a force that made the dunes shudder, swirling into a towering column that swallowed the sky. Isedren squinted as something vast and unmistakably opinionated began taking shape inside the storm. A long snout, pointed ears, and glowing eyes emerged in the churning sand, and a voice rolled through the air that sounded like thunder learning sarcasm. "You mortals really know how to pick terrible locations for life decisions," Seth hissed, the storm vibrating with each word. "I will deal with the bandits and send them straight to Anubis. Amit has been getting a little skinny lately. Poor Go must be hungry. But hear me well, there is one condition. You will take no money for the relic, not a single daben. Break that bargain, and I promise you, the curse that follows will cling to your name longer than the desert itself." With that, the storm lunged across the dunes in a roaring sweep, scattering the bandits like startled scarabs and clearing the buried entrance beneath the shrine. The wind died as abruptly as it came, leaving the desert trembling in its wake as though it needed a moment to recover. When the storm finally settled, the sand had peeled away from the shrine, like a curtain reluctantly opening on the next act, revealing a buried doorway nobody had seen in centuries. Inside, they found a sealed chamber untouched by time, its jars dusty but intact, and a leather bag resting in the center, like it had been waiting specifically for them. Isedren lifted it carefully, feeling a gentle warmth through the linen wrapping, the kind of warmth that suggested the relic was enchanted, or slightly offended at being ignored for so long. Back in Memphis, the temple halls glowed with torchlight as Isedren set the relic on an altar with the quiet pride of someone placing a cat back on its favorite cushion. Nemka's eyebrows shot up so high they practically tried to leave his face, which she took as a sign of approval. When he offered her the promised payment, she stepped back and refused calmly. "Honor is enough," she said, which was true, though the moment Nebka wasn't looking, she did whisper, "Also Seth threatened me, so, you know, priorities." The stone from the heavens was installed in the temple with solemn ceremony, priests chanting while a sunbeam conveniently struck the niche, as if the heavens had been waiting for their cue. Visitors whispered that the gods themselves must have guided its return, though Isedren suspected Seth was somewhere smirking, proud of his own special effects work. Later, the temple unveiled a new statue, a guardian figure carved with Isedren's calm, determined face, as if immortalizing her, saying, "Like and subscribe." She stood before it quietly, a little embarrassed and a little proud, wondering if Seth would pop in to comment on the nose, but thankfully he showed some restraint. Moral: take silver and you lose your way. Choose honor and the gods will stay. What would you do if your own shadow tried to bite you? Menku, a quiet fisherman of Crocodilopolis, rose each dawn to work along the sunlit edge of the Nile. His village stood between broad reed marshes and painted temple walls, buzzing with merchants, priests, and crocodile handlers. The morning air smelled of wet papyrus and clay ovens warming for the day. Menku always waded only into the brightest, safest shallows, where the sand gleamed gold beneath the water. He refused to cast his nets even a step beyond the sunlit line, where the river deepened. Everyone knew his reason. He feared crocodiles with a bone-deep certainty that made him jump at splashes no bigger than a frog's. Children often teased him by tapping the water and shouting warnings whenever a real crocodile surfaced nearby. The next morning, as Menku stepped into the bright shallows with his nets, he froze at the sight of his own shadow stretching across the sand. It looked mostly human, except for a long, unmistakable crocodile snout jutting from its head. He wiped his eyes with both hands, blinking hard as if sand had blown into them. When he looked again, the crocodile-headed silhouette still stared back at him. Menku muttered that he would never drink again if this was what wine did to a man, only to realize he drank nothing but water anyway. The absurdity of it made his voice crack like a reed flute played badly. He spun around in a full circle, but the shadow twirled faithfully with him, crocodile snout and all. When he stopped moving, the shadow's elongated jaws seemed to widen slightly, as if ready to snap. Panicking, Menku rushed to the temple of Sobek, his sandals slapping against the sun-baked stones as he begged the priests for help. He pointed frantically at the floor, insisting they witness his crocodile-headed shadow. But to the priests, his shadow looked utterly ordinary, shaped like any man calmly standing in the sunlight. They glanced at one another, unsure whether they had misunderstood his complaint. One elderly priest crouched, squinting, tilting his head, and even tapping the shadow with a reed stick, but nothing crocodilian appeared. Menku paced in circles, proclaiming that the snout had just been there a heartbeat ago. Whispers echoed among the columns that perhaps Menku was simply overtired or sunstruck. As he stumbled out of the temple, villagers looked at him with the cautious pity reserved for those who saw things others could not. Since the priests had been useless, Menku decided to deal with the problem himself and dragged a large jug of water outside. He poured it over the ground, announcing proudly that he would wash the curse off his shadow like dirt off a fishing net. The wet sand glistened beautifully, but his shadow, still mostly human with that unsettling crocodile snout, stared up at him unchanged. When the snout seemed to tilt slightly, he accused it of mocking his hygiene efforts. Next, he attempted to bribe the shadow by placing a fresh fish right at its feet, promising more offerings if it behaved. Passers-by paused long enough to witness Menku solemnly negotiating with a patch of darkness. The shadow did not react, though Menku swore its snout looked hungrier than before. Embarrassed, he kicked the fish into the river and muttered that crocodile-headed silhouettes clearly lacked manners. Out of ideas, Menku crafted a crude shadow trap by driving 2 sticks into the sand and stretching a thin papyrus sheet between them. He stepped carefully so that his shadow would fall into the frame, hoping the crocodile snout would get caught. The moment he positioned himself, a breeze flattered the papyrus and made the trap collapse in a sad little heap. His shadow, unaffected, lounged on the sand like a bored guardian spirit. Refusing to surrender, Menku tried to scare the shadow away by waving a lit torch at the ground. Villagers stared as he shouted warnings at a flat patch of sunlight, insisting that the snout back off immediately. Instead of retreating, the shadow simply flicked its elongated muzzle forward, as if curious about the torchlight. Menku, defeated, smothered the flame and muttered that even shadows were getting bolder these days. By now, the villagers whispered openly that Menku had lost his mind, pointing to the way he argued with his own shadow in the streets. Mothers pulled their children closer whenever he passed, and even his friends avoided meeting his eyes. Menku refused to step into the sunlight and spent his days sitting beneath the deep shade of his awning where no shadow could follow him. In that dim refuge, he began to wonder whether the problem truly lay in the darkness beneath him or within his own trembling thoughts. Late one afternoon, as Menku sat beneath his awning with the hopeless stillness of a man who feared the sun itself, the reeds along the river began to sway despite the perfectly calm air. A soft tremor rippled across the water, stretching outward in concentric rings. Menku lifted his head just as a deep green shape stirred beneath the shimmering surface. From the river rose Sobek, scales catching the fading light like hammered bronze and eyes glowing with ancient intelligence. Water streamed from his shoulders as he stepped onto the bank, the marsh falling silent around him. Menku felt the weight of the god's presence press gently against his chest. Sobek told him that the strange shadow had not been a curse but a gift, a sign of protection meant to give him courage in the place he feared most. He explained that shadows sometimes reveal truths the eyes refused to see. With the faintest hint of amusement, Sobek added that even blessings work better when mortals remembered to like and subscribe to the currents of wisdom. The god placed a clawed hand on the sand, leaving a luminous imprint that pulsed like sunlight on deep water. He instructed Menku to stand in the open again and trust the river that had sustained his ancestors for generations. As Sobek's form dissolved back into the Nile, the air hummed with the lingering certainty that Menku had never been alone. At sunrise the next day, Menku stepped beyond the familiar golden shallows and let the cool water rise past his knees, then his waist, until the river darkened around him. His heart hammered, yet Sobek's imprint glowed faintly in his memory, steadying his breath. A pair of crocodiles watched him from a distance, their eyes just above the surface like twin beads of amber. Instead of retreating, Menku cast his net into the deep water for the first time, feeling the current wrap around him like a quiet promise. The crocodiles kept their distance, gliding through the deeper channels with slow, watchful eyes, but making no move toward him. Menku felt their presence without fear, as if Sobek's blessing stretched across the surface of the water. When he hauled in his nets, they came up heavy with silver flashes of fish he had never dared try for before. The sheer abundance left him breathless, the weight of the catch far greater than anything he had brought home in seasons. A week later, when Menku stepped into the morning light, he saw only his ordinary human shadow stretching quietly across the sand. Its familiar shape comforted him more deeply than he could have imagined. Inside his home, a small wooden statue of Sobek stood proudly on a shelf, its carved snout lifted as if guarding the room. Menku touched it each dawn in gratitude, remembering the courage he had once thought forever beyond him. Moral: confront your fear before it grows too narrow, for if you flee too long, you may fear even your own shadow. In ancient Egypt, the strangest things happened when a god was crossed. This is the story of a man who crossed the wrong one. Horam's estate stretched along the canal, rich with palms, cattle, and sunlit fields. Everything seemed blessed, except the shade his workers dearly lacked. Horem himself lived comfortably, a broad-chested man who loved his rings as much as his harvests. He was not cruel, merely devoted to keeping every coin he earned. His pride was an ornate wooden coffer, decorated with bronze bands and faience tiles. Inside, his gold and silver lay in neat, perfumed stacks. Long ago, the coffer had been empty. Filling it had become his life's mission, shaping every choice he made. One morning, Menon the foreman asked Horem to inspect the western plot. He spoke calmly, but urgency flickered in his voice. The field was scorching, with no shelter for the men digging under a blazing sun. Even the young palms threw no shade at all. Menon suggested a simple awning, cheap to build and vital for the workers' health. The request was modest, just poles, rope, and palm fronds. But Horem refused, muttering that the sun had never killed anyone who was meant to work. Menon bowed silently and returned to the heat. A few days later, the figs from the eastern grove arrived, strangely tinted a deep, uncanny blue. They tasted perfectly fine, but looked like offerings to a moonlit festival. Market buyers recoiled, whispering about curses and omens. Not a single basket sold, no matter how low the price dropped. Horem tried drying them and mixing them into bread, but their skins remained stubbornly indigo. Sweetness was useless when the fruit looked bewitched. He stored them in frustration, muttering that blue was a color for faience, not food. Still, he dismissed it as a one-time disaster. Soon after, a prized cow birthed a calf with a pale blue hide. It was healthy, strong, and completely unsellable. The second calf came out the same, and then a third from a different mother. Even the most stoic herdsmen touched their foreheads and whispered protective prayers. Priests refused the animals for sacrifice, saying their color broke all ritual norms. Buyers avoided them as if they carried desert spirits. Horem's barns filled with perfectly fine but unwanted calves. His irritation deepened into a low, persistent dread. Desperate, Horem shifted to producing date syrup and wine, but the first jar he opened poured out in a shimmering blue stream. It smelled rich and tasted excellent, but no tavern keeper would touch it. "My customers prefer joy, not nightmares," one said. Jar after jar revealed the same sapphire glow. His storehouse looked like it held fragments of the evening sky. Horem felt trapped in a comedy only the gods found funny. Everything profitable was turning blue except his luck. Under the crushing noon sun, Horem climbed a dusty rise and glared at the sky. Everywhere he looked, the cursed color followed him like a cosmic joke. He shouted at the heavens, asking if the gods were mocking him. Only the cicadas answered, buzzing as if laughing back. At his table that evening, Horem muttered half prayers and half complaints into 2 cups of warm beer. The room felt thick with heat and frustration. Then a tiny blue-skinned figure popped into existence between the cups and cheerfully said, "Yes, you called me?" Bess cracked his knuckles and pointed at a cat stalking him from the shadows. "And you, kitty, don't look at me as if I were your lunch," he scolded. "Beside, I'm friends with your mistress. I curl her whiskers every week." The cat froze, hissed indignantly, and bolted out of sight. The god dusted off his hands with theatrical pride, as though dealing with felines were part of his regular divine duties. He leaned back and grinned widely. Some workers are more devout than others, and some wear the amulet of an excellent deity, a blue deity. Bess hopped toward a pile of gold, placing a hand on a coin half his size. He warned, "If you don't give your workers proper shade today, the next thing that turns blue will be this." And in his tiny palms, the gold began flashing bright blue before he vanished in a swirl of fig-scented mischief. Panicking, Horem ran through his estate, shouting for poles, ropes, palm fronds, anything that could create shade before his gold turned blue. Workers stared in disbelief as their tight-fisted master fetched tools himself. He hammered, tied and wove with desperate determination, muttering, shade today, under his breath. Even he admitted aloud that it was going to be beautiful, and that his workers would surely like and subscribe. By sundown, a handsome awning stood proudly over the western plot, casting generous shade at last. The workers rested beneath it with grateful murmurs carried by the cooling breeze. And in the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The blue figs sold out instantly, the blue calves became prized curiosities, and the blue syrup turned into a festival favorite. A color that once cursed his fortune now attracted crowds from neighboring villages. They all liked and subscribed. Menon, the loyal foreman, continued his work under the new shade, his pale blue Bess amulet catching the light as he lifted tools. The fields felt lighter now, as if the air itself approved of the change. Horem reclined peacefully beneath one of his many new awnings, chest rising and falling in slow contentment. A brand new blue amulet of Bess rested proudly against his skin. Moral: honor those beneath the sun in all the work they do, for greed can stain your golden days and leave them turning blue. What would you do if the god who guarded your world suddenly fell? Osiris lay dead on the cold stone, his crown slipped aside as firelight trembled across the silent hall. Whispers spread that Seth lured Osiris into a feast of false rejoicing, then struck him down once the torches dimmed, slaying his brother before any guardian sensed the treachery unfolding. Later, in a hidden chamber veiled with incense, Isis breathed ancient names, drawing one brief spark into Osiris again, long enough to conceive the child Horus. But Isis knew that Seth would hunt the child, so she gathered her resolve and fled to Earth. Her plan was to hide among humble villagers who would never guess a goddess walked beside them. She reached a remote delta village at dusk, its mud brick roofs crouched low among whispering reeds, offering a hiding place far from Seth's long-shadowed gaze prowling near. Newborn Horus slept against her chest, hidden by coarse linen, his faint divine warmth steadying Isis as she entered the quiet village seeking shelter and silence. But dark clouds gathered beyond the marsh, thunder rolling like Seth's hungry breath, and every gust that swept the reeds warned Isis that danger drew ever closer now, so near. Kind farmers welcomed her without question, offering bread and warmth, seeing only a weary mother in need, never guessing a goddess hid among their humble doorways. In his shadowed stronghold, Seth snarled at drifting rumors, sending a pair of lean red jackals to stalk the marshes and uncover where Isis might be hiding. One jackal stayed low to the ground, slipping between reeds with practiced silence, while the other sniffed the wind sharply, both drawing closer to the village where Isis hid. High above, a lone falcon circled with burning eyes, and then it folded its wings and dropped toward the reeds, racing to strike before the jackals reached the village path. One jackal fell broken in the reeds as the falcon struck, but the other fled limping into darkness, carrying news of Isis's hidden refuge to Seth. He blended with wandering traders near the huts, studying Isis from afar, watching the way she avoided every curious gaze, her cautious movements betraying a danger she carried quietly with her. He moved among wandering traders near the huts, watching Isis closely, noting how she shunned every shrine, convinced her guarded silence hid a secret there. Then he snuck into the house and raised his arm to strike, but a cold hand seized his wrist, and Nephthys, the goddess of twilight, appeared beside him. "Touch my sister's baby, and I'll haunt you and your kind for 77 generations," Nephthys warned, and the shaken assassin stumbled back and scampered off that night. When he saw his plan unraveled again, Seth gathered his rage, shaping it into a venomous serpent that coiled to life, eager to strike the helpless child hidden on earth. The snake slipped through the marsh unseen, gliding beneath the reeds so low that even the watching falcon missed its shadowed path, never sensing the danger moving closer. Nephthys waited in twilight at the doorway, yet the serpent slid past her glow without fear, its cold eyes fixed ahead, as if no goddess living could bar its path. It reached the sleeping child at last, struck once with silent venom, and Horus gasped as color drained from his skin, his tiny breath faltering in the hush around him. When Isis returned to the small dim room, she froze, for Horus lay still upon the mat, his lips paling to blue as the venom tightened its hold upon him. Isis cradled Horus as his breath faded, whispering, "No, no. You are the son of a god. You cannot die. You just can't," her voice trembling with rising terror now still. Isis knelt beside him and began to chant, a faint glow rising around her, while villagers gathered at the doorway, sorrowful, yet drawn to the strange light awakening there. Her chanting deepened, and the light around her strengthened, brightening through the room until the villagers stepped back in alarm, retreating from the power rising there. Then she blazed like a newborn sun, her voice shaking heaven. "You are meant to be king of gods. You cannot die. I, Isis, daughter of Geb and Nut, forbid it." The house erupted in blinding light that surged beyond its walls, flooding the marshes and piercing the night sky so fiercely that distant travelers saw its radiance flare. At dawn, the elder of the village found Isis sitting still with Horus in her arms, each crowned by a faint glowing halo, as morning light drifted softly through the room that calm day. The elder bowed and called her "my lady," saying, "That was no ordinary serpent, and none here have ever seen such light before in all our years within this place." Isis sighed and said it was her brother Seth, that he had lost all reason, and though she would find a way to stop him, they were not safe within this village now. She said she would craft a floating island to change its place each night, adding with a weary smile, "Ptah will help me build it. He still owes me one." I liked and subscribed to all his plans. Later that day, she stood beside the riverbank, preparing to depart, while the elder and gathered villagers told her softly they would miss her more than words could say. Isis smiled and bowed her head to them. "You are good people. When all this is over, and after your long lives close, we will meet again in the field of reeds." What if reality did not break all at once, but began to slip, imperceptibly, out of alignment? Thoth adjusted the symbol of the eye and instantly realized something was badly wrong. The eye was sacred. It had healed Horus after his war with Seth, and its calm light kept shadows honest, waters steady, and every hour properly measured for gods and mortals alike. But one small piece had slipped away, and without it the eye wavered. Shadows bent at odd angles, the first sign that greater faults would soon trouble the earth. Thoth checked his celestial engine, and it traced the missing piece plunging to earth, noting that no one sensed the anomalies yet, except one sleepless watcher. Thoth's blue screen revealed a man lying awake in bed, eyes wide and tense, studying shadows on his ceiling as if they whispered warnings only he could hear. The screen then showed him pleading in a hall, gesturing wildly as a bored ruler watched, and two priests traded wary glances, dismissing every warning he tried to offer. Thoth chose that man instantly, and a heartbeat later he materialized above the man's bed, in a halo of turquoise, lapis, and gold. Thoth spoke his name softly, Bakhinamon, and said, "I have a task for you. A stone has fallen from the sky, and you must retrieve it." Thoth gave him a small enchanted box and said, "It will guide you to the stone. The nearer you come, the brighter its light will grow. Start in the desert near the oasis of Karga. My calculations indicate the stone fell close to those sands, so begin there. The impact must have left traces." At dawn, Bakhinamon rode toward the oasis on camelback, his heart pounding as he kept the box secured inside a leather bag at his side. The road to Karga stretched for miles beneath the fierce Egyptian sun, and Bakhinamon pressed on through shimmering heat, feeling the desert breathe its slow, relentless rhythm around him. Yet the desert held its own dangers, for lions prowled the empty stretches, moving like flickers of gold through the heat, as Bakhinamon pressed onward, unaware. But the lions never attacked. Instead, guided by Lady Sekhmet's unseen will, they paced alongside the journey, escorting the traveler through the heat as silent guardians. And the vulture goddess Nephthys kept a watchful eye on Bakhinamon from above, her wide wings circling calmly as she guarded the lonely path he followed. At last he reached higher ground, and the oasis came into view. He saw its vast spread of palms and greenery stretching for miles, a promise of shade after days beneath the brutal sun. At the oasis, Bakhinamon drank deeply and rested his legs, then asked a nearby villager if anyone had seen or heard a strange stone fall from the sky. The man nodded and said it had landed somewhere beyond the dunes, though no one knew where, for the desert was vast and the sands had already swallowed all trace. Bakhinamon opened the box, and its pale blue glow strengthened slightly when you turned north. That alone was enough to convince him to leave at once. As Bakhinamon headed for the dunes, the villager watched him go with a faint smile, thinking that luck would follow him, and that he would not walk alone. As Bakhinamon rode into the darkened dunes at night, guided by the growing blue glow, he never suspected that unseen footsteps followed him across the cooling sand. Hours later, the box fled brighter in his hands. Guided by its glow, Bakhinamon finally reached the place where the mysterious stone from the sky had fallen. At the crater's base, Bakhinamon found the fallen stone. It shone like a diamond and seemed to observe him. He wrapped it in cloth and hid it inside his leather bag. But when he climbed from the crater, he stopped, breath held tight, heart pounding. 4 jackals circled him in silence, teeth bared, ready to attack. Then something out of this world happened. Thoth himself appeared, and the jackals scattered in terror. They fled into the dark, except one that stayed, frozen and listening from above. "You, Rascal Hotep, tell your master that brevity is the soul of wit. Nobody will like and subscribe to chaos unless he starts to show some due respect for the elegance of order. Tell him to leave the Eye of Horus alone," Thoth added. "I would hate to reset the world again. This experiment survives barely as it is now. Then Thoth turned to Bakinamon. Thank you for your service. Return to the city and speak of this to no one. Your task is ended and will be forgotten soon. Meanwhile, the message had reached Seth. Thoth truly has no sense of humor at all. He muttered, simulation this, quantum mechanics that. Never 1 minute to grab a can of beer and have some fun. Then he rose and admired the master plan that would one day spill chaos across desert sands, troubling gods above and mortals far below, when the moment was right at last. Back in the city, Bakinamon saw the obelisk shadows fall true again, and he breathed out in quiet relief as night settled slowly over the familiar streets. Still, when he looked at the starry sky, he felt quiet awe at the uncanny way the gods moved unseen.